So my name is Michaela Mills, and my full-time job is with Family Preservation Services. And I actually hold two positions there. I'm what they call the IDD lead, which really just means I'm the person everybody goes to if they have a question about intellectual and developmental disabilities, so that we can provide mental health services to a neurodiverse population. So I've been here for almost 5 years now, right at 5 years. And prior to that, I was with the Autism Society for 16 years, which means I had a lot of experience working with individuals going through puberty and helping their families, because it's a family affair. And then I also co-chair something called the IDD Advocacy Coalition, which is about education and awareness around both intervention and prevention of sexual assault, specifically for people with IDD. So that's kind of where my passion came around, both looking at puberty and also sexual health, and knowing that there is a big gap there when it comes to comprehensive education. So I really like to talk about, I love this topic, and I could talk for a long time, but I know we don't have a lot of time. I definitely would prefer that we were all together so that we could have a lot more conversation back and forth. Feel free to put some questions in the chat, and I think probably what will work best this time is if we just save some questions for the end, because I feel like otherwise I could run out of time. So you know, it sounds like you guys all have children of all ages. I also just want to say that I'm also a parent. I helped raise 2 young women as a bonus mom. They are 20 and almost 22. And then I have a biological son who is turning 12 next month. So I have also had that experience as a parent and currently. And I was sharing with Bertha earlier that my son has been very helpful, because we've had these conversations, you know, a lot, because I've been working around this topic even before he was really hitting the age of puberty. And honestly, he's really not even showing a lot of signs yet, really just the moodiness part, but not a lot of physical changes yet, because it's different for everyone. But I do have him, actually kind of preview my materials. So I'll say, hey, could you check out this book? It's for work. And then you can let me know if this will be good for my clients. And that's kind of my end to get this education to him without it feeling as awkward. And we can talk a little bit more about that. So what we do know, right, is puberty is a confusing time for all adolescents, whether or not they have a disability or special health care needs. And I would like to just also disclose too that none of my children do have a specific disability. So I have been within my own household, it has been, I guess, typical, but I don't think there's a lot typical about puberty in general. So this is when your child's body is going through developmental changes, and they might not know why. So, you know, children with disabilities are human. Puberty is a part of the human experience, and every human needs a different level of support growing up, including puberty, sexual health, and healthy relationships. So since it can be overwhelming and uncomfortable for kids and parents alike, that's why I'm glad that I guess this is the 3rd year that I've been able to come, you know, with St. Gerard House and the Family Support Night so we can support each other just as parents and caregivers, going over questions, concerns, and wisdom. I do wish we could do it in person, and hopefully next year we'll be back in person. So I want to think about, you know, as we're kind of going through these slides, I want you be thinking about what is the same and what is different about supporting a child through puberty with a person with a disability versus a typically developing child. And I think what you'll find, right, is a lot of it is the same, and then we also know there's going to be some things that are just going to look really different. So some just basics on puberty. You know, this is the time when your body changes from being the body of a child to the body of an adult. And as a parent, we must communicate that this is normal, healthy, and it happens to everyone. It's also important to note that, like all human development, that the timeline and the appearance is different for everyone. And I think I heard as you guys were introducing your own children, right? My child started at this age and it's lasted 3 years, or, it's lasted 1 year. What I think we can all agree on is that if we're not prepared for puberty, it can all be rather confusing, and our child will worry less if they know what to expect. So it's important to note that, like all human development, that the timeline and the appearance is going to be different for everyone when it comes to puberty. So the changes are going to be the same. How we communicate and provide education may be very different with your child than a typically developing child. So let's first discuss the body changes. So this can range over a few months to a few years, and usually starts between the ages of 9 and 16. And that is the same for folks with a variety of disabilities. We see that some folks who have IDD or autism or FASD, there's not an earlier stage or a later stage of this. It really just varies like typically developing children. But what everyone experiences is a spurt in growth, increase in weight, tendency to be clumsier. There's a deepening in the voice, even for females, and a growth of pubic hair, underarm hair, increased body odor, yay, as well as moodiness, sexual feelings, and changes in how you feel about your friends and also your family, right? This is when we start seeing those shifts in communication and relationships, even with us as their caregivers. Because some things we often see, right, is that wanting more connection with peers and sometimes wanting a lot more privacy from their parents and from other caregivers. And of course, there's also the development of sexual organs, such as an increase in the size of the penis, testicles, breasts, vaginal secretions, and the start of menstruation, or the period, right? So it's important to use all of these actual terms from the beginning, even as very, very young ones. I know someone said that they have a 4-year-old. Because when we talk about puberty, we must think about their physical age and not their cognitive age equivalent. But even as young children, they really need to know the actual names of their body. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. And I did want to mention, because I don't think I highlighted this, it is in my resource notes, but It's Not the Stork and It's So Amazing are really great books by Roby Harris for that younger age group, even as young as 4 years old, to talk about those, where do babies come from? So actual terms are really a must for learning and prevention of challenges around puberty and even sexual assault. So therefore, we want to use not only really concrete words, but also the most realistic photos. And I'm going to talk about some resources and some links at the end on where there's some photos on taking care of the body and body parts. I know it can be uncomfortable because we may not have been raised to discuss sexual health in those concrete terms. Again, if we were in person, I always kind of enjoy hearing from others kind of what values they were brought up on, and also what kind of terminology, if they even talked at all, right, about, the physical changes of their body during puberty or sexuality. So it's important to be open, honest, specific, and concrete to explain in a way that can be understood. And we know for a lot of the, children that we're talking about right now, that that's going to probably be in writing or with pictures and photos, and how important it is, just like when we're teaching other skills, that we are constantly checking for understanding and repeating this and teaching it in different ways so that they can generalize some of this information. This is a time to empower our children, even if they're, young adults, about the autonomy of their bodies. So that's where it's so important using the actual terminology. So remember that curiosity and education is not harmful. And when your child says, "Do not touch my penis," or "Do not touch my vagina," that will be better understood than "Don't touch my stem" or "my flower," or another word. So overall, we want to model body positivity, autonomy, boundaries, consent, as well as assertive communication. And we know as parents and caregivers, right, that even if our children aren't presenting that way, that they're always, we're their first teachers. We're the people that they're seeing all the time, probably more than any of us want to during the pandemic, together all the time, that we have to model those skills for them. So I did actually add a slide on here. So this is just a book list on puberty, and you'll see right here at the top is Roby Harris. And these books have been around, gosh, I think since the mid-90s. I think she first started It's Perfectly Normal, which is actually for 10 and up, I believe, in 1995. And then later came out with It's So Amazing and It's Not the Stork for younger children. But they constantly are being updated. And actually, I think she's supposed to get another updated version that's actually coming out later this year. And then we'll talk a little bit more about some of these other guides as well. So some of the things I think that we really need to be aware of, right, is that the growing pains are real. This is both physically, emotionally, sleeping patterns change, everything about their bodies are changing, which we know is going to affect the whole household. So again, really being conscious about body image and self-esteem. That includes the way that you present about your own body and your own body positivity, but also checking in with them and again, providing some of that education about the changes that are happening within their body. I mean, even right now, I have to admit, I was telling Bertha earlier, the sun is coming in this window. I'm not used to being here at this time of night when the sun is still up and glaring in this window, and I'm a little sweaty, right? And if I didn't know why my body was secreting sweat because the sun's coming in my window, right? Especially when we add in there some of the additional sensory challenges, not knowing why we're all of a sudden having these sexual sensations. And this is where we really have to, teach these methodically, I guess I'll just say. I already kind of talked a little bit about consent and how important it is to be teaching that from a really young age. And it's really a two-way street. So when I talk about body autonomy, this is where from a really young age, being able to both set up our own boundaries on when our children can touch us or their siblings or other family members, but also that they have the autonomy and the assertive communication to let others know when it's okay for them to be touched. Now, I am sure that some of you guys have kids who are very good at saying that they don't want to be touched, right? They may never want to be touched. But again, this is where it's really important because we do have some individuals with disabilities who have caregivers coming, in and out of, maybe their homes or their residences, helping them bathe, helping them shower, whether or not those are paid caregivers or different family members. And this can be problematic, right? Is when they don't realize that their body is their own and that they can say no for someone to touch their body. And then, of course, we also have when it comes to what is private versus what is public. And I could do a whole 45 minutes on talking about private versus public. And so we can talk more if people have questions or specific examples of things that you're struggling with, especially if it's around, touching themselves or masturbation. But there are some of the links that I have in the slides do have some specific resources for that as well. So this is actually a new slide that I put in because I just came across this year, but this is a link here called kidsask.org. And what it actually has is you click on it, and actually let me see if I can bring it over really quick because I had it up. But you're able to, I'm worried I'll mess up those slides here. But you're able to actually just put in the ages of your child, like the age range. So I put 11 to 12 years old. Then you can put in whether or not you want to start a conversation or if you want to respond, right? Because what we really want to work on is responding to these questions that might be uncomfortable for us as opposed to reacting, right? Especially if someone comes in right? So the question here, so it has a lot of different questions, you know, you can do a search engine. And so I just scroll through some, and this one says, is it normal for boys to get tender nipples during puberty, right? So this might be something that someone asked. And then it gives you kind of a step-by-step of the way that you can respond to your child. So this one says, I'm honored you're sharing what you're thinking about, and I recognize that it might be hard to share. What have you heard? Yes, boys and girls can experience tender or sore nipples during puberty. I'm so glad you want to know about your body, and it's great to be curious about your body. So this was actually developed by BCBA in collaboration with Planned Parenthood. And I think what's nice is I think for a lot of us, right, not just for our kids and kids with disabilities, but it can be nice to have a little bit of a framework when we're having kind of difficult conversations. And you might not be using this many words, right, with the individual that you're working with. That might not be the best communication strategy. However, I do think it gives some good framework that if they come in and ask something about, you know, masturbation or something that's really uncomfortable, this gives you a framework of giving a safe space that they are going to continue to come to you with those questions, as opposed to going to the internet or to their friends where they might get more challenging information. So this is from amaze.org, which is another great resource. Amaze.org has a variety of video presentations. So we know a lot of kids with autism and IDD are visual learners. And they're short little clips from anything around puberty, sexuality, gender, but it has an educator section, a kids section, as well as a parent section. And so this is what they call kind of the refrigerator list. So they're just words, practice saying them around, you know, using real terminology. Raising sexual healthy children begins at birth. Remember to look at the world through kids' eyes. Questions about origins are not about sex. So I think this is something that comes up a lot, right? So if someone asks, where do babies come from? A lot of times parents will jump in and be like, oh no, now I have to explain about sex. And I forget who said this earlier, but might say it's about two people who love each other and then they want to make a baby. You know, they might actually, you want to answer that question in the most simple way. When kids ask questions, it means they're ready to hear the answer, but it doesn't mean they're ready to hear the answer for a question they did not ask, okay? So where do babies come from? Well, guess what? They come from the mother, right? Well, how do they come out of the mother? Okay, so now we're kind of a little closer, right? So you don't always want to kind of jump ahead and answer questions that aren't actually being asked. And again, I think that's where the kidsask.org can be really helpful with giving some of that framework. Curiosity about people's bodies is very normal. No, you don't have to wait until they ask. You can start bringing up the subject. And of course, again, I know with some of, I can assume with some of the children that you guys are raising may not ever ask, they might actually have those words to ask, or their communication barriers might be in a place where they don't really have that communication to ask about it. So giving children a values vocabulary, we don't really have time to go over that today, but I'll also send a link. There's no one right way to be a girl or a boy. All sexes and genders deserve respect, and advocate for sexuality education for all kids. And again, this is at the amaze.org, and you can go to that parent section. So what exactly does sexual health mean? So this is about feeling good about and understanding their bodies. It's about feeling good about their gender identity and their sexual orientation. It's about having relationships that are positive and pleasurable and not exploitive. Having information to make healthy decisions. And I think that this is where, with my work with the IDD Advocacy Coalition and with the Family Justice Center, both here in Buncombe County and also we just started working with Henderson County, is we often find that people with disabilities do not have the information that they need to have healthy relationships. And then also we'll need that education around, you know, avoiding other things that come along with sexuality, such as sexual transmitted infections, unintended pregnancies, and other challenges as well. So human sexual development. So, you know, all humans are sexual beings. This does not mean anything about what type of sexuality that they're going to express, but we do know that developmentally, the development of biological sex is going to be there. There's gender assignment. There's development of gender identity and also what they learn within their society around gender roles. Again, development of values and attitudes about sexuality, which is really, you know, usually going to come from your household. And this is why it's so important to kind of start talking about that and being open so that they're not going to look at other places for those values and attitudes. And also having a healthy outlet for sexual feelings, relationships, and that includes masturbation, which is, again, a part of sexual health. Again, depending on the questions that your child is asking, I know that for, you know, my 11, almost 12-year-old, that we watch some of these videos together, and you know, we're able to talk about that. And again, it's on a range of things, even just about how is my body changing, what happens if someone asks you to send a photo through text, and just about friendship changes in general. So there's a wide variety of things. And again, I always suggest that folks that you watch these things together so that you can talk about it and kind of educate each other, as opposed to just handing over the website and hoping that somebody else is going to kind of teach those roles. So what we really want to do as the role of the caregiver and parent, right, is provide information and providing it in the best way for our child, right? You are the expert of your child in the way that they learn and the way that they communicate and retain information. And of course, we all need support around these challenging parts of raising children. So we want to provide that information in a way that they can learn and understand. We need to listen and really listen so that they know that they're being understood. Modeling those values that we want to support. Answer questions, and again, being honest, and just responding in a positive way about sexuality in general. So that way, again, that they are more likely to come with you to questions as opposed to looking up on the internet. And I feel like every year I've done this presentation, you know, that's a whole nother training, right? Of talking about what our kids can learn from the internet, especially because the access to the internet is so great. And what we really want to do is just shift from what we talk about a prison of protection to a ring of safety. And that's what we do when we're providing our children with this education. So we want to find all of those teachable moments. So reassure the person that it's good to ask questions. We want to find out what the person thinks and what they're really asking. And this is another good tip, I should say, is if someone, or, you know, if your child asks you a question, it's always good to maybe potentially to follow up with a question to find out what they're really asking about, because they may ask you a question and you're like, oh no, what is that? That might be, you know, something about porn they've seen on, you know, on the internet, whereas actually it has something to do with something completely different. But to also get an understanding, right? So if you need a little time, you can always say, you know, so what do you think about that? Or where did you hear that from? And you can also always tell your child that you're not sure about that and you need time to process and get back to them. I also realize, right, again, that when we're talking about puberty for people with disabilities, that sometimes these are not verbal conversations, right? Again, this is where we're going to have to be pulling out books and photos and really thinking about how we adapt this information. Decide what kind of message you want to give. Again, answering that question simply, using medical terminology, and really encouraging the person to give feedback. What do you think about that? And speaking of, when we just watched the video about gender identities and sexual orientation, there's a book I actually don't have on this list yet. I just got it about a month ago. It's called What? I can't remember exactly now, but it's a graphic novel. And I would say it would be really good for kind of that 12, teenage, 12 probably to 14-year-old, depending on their reading level. But it's talking about friendships and puberty, different types of bodies. And it also had some terminology in there that I wasn't familiar with yet, such as things is attracted to femininity versus being attracted to women. And we won't go into all those nuances, but it was nice to go through that book and talk about it with my son. And one of the things, terminology that you'll hear is demisexual, which means that you're not sexually attracted to someone until you have developed a deep relationship with that person. And my son said, shouldn't everyone be demisexual? Shouldn't you only have sexual feelings for someone if you have a really good, long relationship with them first? And I said, you would think that, but that's not the way bodies work, right? So sometimes for some people, that's not the way it works, but for some people they do, right? And of course, for me, I'm like, yes, maybe that will be my son. But it was a good conversation starter there. So when we're thinking about adolescence, we've already talked a little bit about these physical changes of puberty and some of the things that probably some of your children are already having some challenges around, because we know that people who especially have intellectual and developmental disabilities, whether it's because of fine motor skills or their executive functioning, that these daily living tasks are already a challenge, right? So keeping up with their hygiene. And then we put on top of it, we've got to add the deodorant. They have to kind of be more aware of their body and know if they have body odor, or do they even care that they have body odor? Do they even notice it, right? That goes back to that body awareness. And I think I also always like to kind of remind also parents that this is a struggle, I think, for raising our typically developing children as well. I don't know how many times I'll say, did you wash your face? You're probably going to really want to start washing your face, right? Because this is time that, your skin gets to get more oily. And I would like for, him to avoid that pain of having acne. And so thinking about, all of these things are really important and topics that are going to come up. And as I expressed before, right, is not only do we need to be thinking about body image, because even if your child is not verbally expressing to you about concerns with their body, this is a natural part of human development, is as your body changes, that it doesn't feel comfortable anymore. And again, we put it on top of sensory challenges for people, on the autism spectrum, disorder, or other disabilities, and that might be really difficult for them. But I think a lot of times we also then forget about, right, is that oftentimes people with IDD or autism also already have a hard time in the area of socialization. So during puberty, this is a time that their bodies are actually going to start craving, this is just a natural part of development, are usually craving more social connection and wanting to establish and maintain more intimate relationships that are outside of their family. So how do they express affection? What's appropriate ways to express affection? How can they communicate, with, this as their partner, but what about, just asking, creating a new friend, and then up all the way into deciding to have sex or giving and receiving pleasure. And then, right, is breaking up. I know right now, we have even, again, with the pandemic, there's even more concerns about how are our kids socializing with others, and learning through that through, virtually like we are now, and how that communications. And I know that some, for some people, this is easier, and for some people, it's harder to do it on a virtual format. But these are the types of things that we need to be aware of. And again, we're going to have to help our children understand those nuances. So it's all about really presentation again, right? So using books with clear and concrete pictures. We want to practice those socialization skills, right? But also hygiene. So practice in private and apply information in real world situations. A lot of regular education materials can, be adapted. And I would say a lot of the books that are on puberty do already have a lot of pictures and photographs anyway, or comic strips. I think sometimes I've just had to adapt some things, even books that have been that are for people with disabilities sometimes just have too many words. And that's why I like some of the materials that I'm going to talk about, will have a social story that you can, just take out, and then you can adapt to make your own, or take pictures out or add them in. So just really, again, being open and honest. If they ask, they're ready to know, and providing that simple and clear information. So, and just again, taking advantage of all of those teachable moments. So new hygiene routines, and I keep meaning to add, because I have a good one that's about, changing your menstrual pad, right? These are another, added thing that is going to have to be added into these charts. And so, whether that's using photographs or pic symbols or just a simple check sheet, these are things that kind of have to be added on. And one, I really do like these two books. So Taking Care of Myself, a Hygiene, Puberty, and Personal Curriculum for Young People with Autism. I have found it really useful for people who have other developmental disabilities as well. And then the Taking Care of Myself #2 is geared more for teenagers and young adults with autism. And again, these are books that I take all of my books and I cut the binding off and I put them in a binder, so I can just take out the ones I need quickly for people, and can make a copy of that social story or that, that picture script. And it's really just all about personal hygiene around puberty. I know that you guys have been using some of this curriculum with Davida Hartman, sexuality and relationship education. Again, it also has some things you can just pick and choose from around teaching around puberty. And then my last favorite that I'm going to share is called Making Sense of Sex. So this one, I have also used, both taken out chapters, but this reads more like a chapter book, but also has photographs. And I have worked with several people who have autism or, Asperger's, if they prefer that language, that we've kind of gone over one chapter at a time in a session, or even broken it down, because the one about puberty, right? Like there's a lot of information, the way your body changes. But it's got simple line drawings, and it's just written in a really clear and concrete way. So body changes, right? But what we usually see first and for the longest period of time are going to be mood changes, right? So those big bursts of energy, strong emotions, not knowing how to communicate it. And again, if you're a person with a disability, you're probably going to have even greater communication challenges. So, you guys who have already been through this training before, have worked with me, know that I'm all about emotional regulation and knowing that we need to be able to co-regulate ourselves so that we can respond instead of react to these hard times. And specifically, I really do like working with the zones of regulation, which I know that St. Gerard House uses as well. So these are just some examples there. Thinking about different communication strategies, especially teaching how to communicate pain, because again, pain is going to come in, especially in adolescence, and also teaching assertive communication. Important. So you'll see on this, so, I know, for you guys doing ABA at St. Gerard House, right? We're all about our data collection. But this is actually a data collection sheet that I have authored for so many different people that I've worked with, to both kind of keep track of, mood changes, but also around, and actually I've changed this to not minutes of exercise, but movement minutes, because I don't really mean exercise. It's just moving around, which often can help with menstrual pain. Hours slept, if you've had bowel movement, whether you've had your period or not, and a good way to kind of, start keeping track. And again, even if you're doing that with your child, but that's also going to help prepare them to be more independent with that routine as they get older. So social changes and shifting boundaries. So, social needs are just important. I mean, they are, and they're going to look different for everyone. I will. And so some things we want to think about, though, is providing some of that anticipatory guidance and role playing around who is a close friend, who is an acquaintance, who is an internet friendship, right? We all have different levels or in this, in the circles program, they talk about different circles of social relationships, right? And how do we interact with a stranger or community helper versus a close family or friend? And so these are things I know that are really difficult as you're aging through adolescence. So these are just some examples, and these you can just Google Circles program and they're going to pop right up. And again, I always individualize things, and you'd want to individualize them for your own child. But this talks a little bit about just generalizations about which circle are they in and what's appropriate. Do I give hugs and kisses? We can't even go into talking about how the pandemic has changed all of those things today. But, and just talks a little bit about, again, like, what are some things that you might do when you're alone in your bedroom that are not going to be appropriate, say, in the school bathroom, right? And we want to be able to really talk about healthy relationships, right? So what does it mean to have a healthy relationship with someone? So this is the Healthy Relationships Wheel that talks about, respect, people who take care of you, they want to spend time with you, they listen to you. And I have a couple of links in here about kind of developing more intimate, healthy relationships as well. And we also need to be teaching, especially, our older adolescents and teenagers and young adults, is what is not identifying an unhealthy relationship, right? When do you know that someone is trying to have power and control over you? And again, or having those kind of grooming types of behaviors. So, people with disabilities are simply sexual beings. They're not overly sexual. They just need to know how to express that and also have an outlet for those types of more intimate relationships. I also really like the 5 Against the Law book, which is part of that 5-point scale. It is old and doesn't have a lot of stuff in there about internet relationships, which I think is really important. But I also think that in a lot of ways, everything is still really current and valid. And what it really talks about is as you get into being a teenager, that some things that you did when you started going from the scale from 1 to a 5, that now that 5 means that, it could be against the law, or you could actually be, put yourself in trouble or even in jail. And those are things such as if you call someone over and over again, or have some of those types of obsessive or stalking type behaviors. So thinking about safety. So individuals with disabilities are often taught values and beliefs that affect behavior and social etiquette, making them more likely to be victims, such as compliance, obeying the rules of those who are in charge. Don't be assertive, don't get angry, don't get in the red zone. And so this is an area too, right, that we want to provide the tools that they need to also be able to protect themselves. And I did put in an extra slide in here as well. This is something else that I kind of came across this past year as I have an adolescent around internet safety, especially during the pandemic. This is the smarttalk.org. And it is a way to put together, it outlines a safety contract, so you can just pick and choose the things that you want to go over with your child, and then it will print out a custom contract about internet safety or phone usage. Again, this is not geared towards people with autism or disabilities, but it's very clear and concrete, and I think it's a really good tool for some folks. We could certainly maybe try and add some photos or pictures in there for individuals who need that. All right, I'm trying not to go too fast. I only have a couple more slides and then we'll have time for questions. So these are some other links just on puberty, sexuality, and disability, including some videos. And I think, the main takeaway I just like to talk about is, being honest, thinking about communication bias and the way that, we need to give that communication. You as the parent can know that best. Always being curious. Being curious is what helps us learn. And just realizing that it's going to take longer probably to teach these skills than it did with maybe, a typically developing peer or sibling. And so if we can have clear expectations, give lots of choices, control, and consistency. All right, any questions or comments? Well, I hope that next time we can meet in person, and I'm always happy for any follow-up, and I'm gonna go home and see my kiddo.
Thank you again. We're so grateful. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you
Thank you,
next month.
everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye, everybody.